Okay, so today we'll understand about Docker Compose, specifically version 2, which is the latest version. Okay, so you'll understand the difference between version 1 and version 2. Okay, so this V1 and V2 are not for the Docker Compose syntax. So this is for the version of Docker Compose that is released. Okay, so Docker Compose V1, it's an old now. So we have to rely on Docker, Compose version 2. Okay, but inside this you will have file versions like the syntax that Docker Compose uses. Okay, V1 had a different syntax and V2 had a different syntax. Again, under V1 you have V1, V2, V3. These are the file syntaxes. Okay, so when we talk about Docker Compose V2, it is the version of the Docker Compose binary itself. Okay, so don't get confused. So we are just looking at the latest version. All the features remain same. Okay, so there are no changes. Probably some new features came along with Docker Compose V2. So why we use Docker Compose? Okay, so let's say you have an application stack where you need to deploy, let's assume 5 different containers. Okay, so in order to deploy 5 different containers, what you will do? You have to run Docker run command 5 times, right? Correct. And if you have any networking requirement, so you will create a specific bridge network like Docker network create, and then you will create a network. In case if volumes are required, you have to first create the volumes. Okay, so using Docker volume create. Correct, guys.
Yes.
Okay. And also, let's say, you have a dependency order. Let's say, first I want the fourth container to be up, and then third container to be up. At last, I'll try to bring up first container. The reason why this order is required is, let's say, maybe 4 and 3 are databases. Okay. So without the database containers, let's say if you try to deploy your application that uses databases, these applications might fail without the database containers. Okay, so how do you define this dependency order? Okay, you can't define the dependency order when you're manually creating those containers, right? Okay, so you need to first create a fourth container using Docker run like this. Okay, correct. And also if I have to, bring down the complete application, so I need to use Docker stop for all these 5 different containers. Okay, so this is practically, very difficult to manage. Okay. So Docker Compose is a tool, for creating, running, and managing multiple containers as a single service, which means with a single command, you can bring up multiple containers at once. And with a single command, you can bring down all containers at once. Okay, no need to run Docker run command individually. Okay. And also you don't have to create volumes, networks and all. Okay, if you simply say that this is the network my container should be in, automatically your Docker Compose tool will create it first. Got it, guys? So with a single command, you can manage your complete application. Okay, anyways, we are not using Docker Compose. So this is again a local tool itself. Um, we'll be using Kubernetes, Helm charts, and all for deploying the applications to Kubernetes. But it is best to understand how to use Docker Compose tool to deploy multiple containers at once and how it actually works. Okay, right? So earlier, Docker Compose, this command we used to invoke using this particular, CLI command like Docker-compose. So this is an old V1 version of Docker Compose where you do Docker-compose to, invoke the compose tool. But now in V2, you just have to use Docker space compose. You don't have to put hyphen and all. Okay, because compose is embedded into Docker CLI. Okay, so you don't have to separately download this as a binary. Okay, so earlier when you install Docker, right, so only Docker CLI used to get installed. Okay, in order to install Docker Compose, in Docker desktop anyways it will come, but for if you have to do it in Linux or other operating systems that doesn't support Docker desktop, right? So we have to install Docker CLI and then Docker Compose separately. Okay, If you see Docker Compose, it is a single name. So it is a separate binary. But now this is not a separate binary. So this is just like a sub command. Okay. So other than that, there are no other changes. Probably some features are introduced, but Docker Compose V2 still supports V1 syntax. Okay, for backward compatibility. Because let's say internally in your organization, you might have developed some automation scripts and all, so that uses V1. Okay, V1 version of the Compose. Even though if you invoke those scripts using Docker hyphen Compose, still those will work because of the backward compatibility. Okay. See, let's say I have to deploy these two applications. Like I have WordPress, which is serving like a front end, and then I have a back end, which is my SQL database. Okay, if I have to deploy them separately, I need to run Docker run command twice. And before that, I need to create a network and make sure that these two containers are placed into that custom bridge network for DNS resolution, which we already talked about, right? So now we don't have to individually run them. With a single compose file, I can deploy this complete application like these two containers with a single command. Okay. And these are the various commands supported by Docker Compose. Okay. As I already said earlier, we used to invoke this compose binary using Docker-compose, but now it is Docker space compose. If you just get the help section, okay, so you will see similar commands like Docker run. Okay. So where if you create a file with multiple container definitions, I can simply bring up all the containers using up command. Okay, so create and start containers. So whatever containers definitions you put in that compose file, your compose tool is going to bring up all the containers at once, and you can use down to bring down all the containers. And remember, networking is also destroyed. Okay, so the reason why networking is also destroyed is, so whenever we bring up an application using Docker Compose, okay, if you don't ask it to create any custom bridge network, it will automatically create a custom bridge network. Okay, which means by default, so whenever you deploy some containers using a compose file, it will automatically create a custom bridge network for you, and then only it will deploy all the containers in it. Okay. So which means no other containers will be in that network apart from the containers that you mentioned in the compose tool. That's the reason why whenever you try to bring down that complete stack, so it will also bring down the networks because there are no other containers and there is no meaning to have that network. But if you are using any volumes, it is not going to bring down the volume because volumes will have some backup data. Okay. Clear, guys? And apart from that, you can use top, RM, you can push all the images, pull all the images from the compose file. So whatever commands that you usually find for Docker run, most of the commands are also supported for compose tool also. Okay, got it? So when you install Docker Compose, Docker Desktop, it always comes with the Docker Compose. Okay. So I checked this in my Windows machine. So I have latest version of Docker Desktop running. And if I simply say Docker space compose space version, it is going to give you the compose file version. Otherwise, you will have to download it manually via a plugin, which we will see. Okay. Clear? Any questions, guys? Right. Okay. So now look at the compose file syntax. So it might look very difficult to remember, but it is not. Okay. So when we want to create a container, so what all things we will require? We will require the name of the container, the image of the container, the port mapping, the volumes, networks in which you want to put that particular container, right? Apart from that, what else you will require? You will also require the restart policy. Let's say hyphen hyphen restart, I can say always. So the failed container will always restart. Correct. So these are the only requirements. If you want, you can also use environment. variables in it. So these are the flags that we use for running a container. Okay. The same thing applies to the compose file as well. So compose file, instead of defining a single container, it defines so-called services. Services means individual containers. So under the services, you have to write the first service information. Okay, so you can call this as container one. So what should the name of the container? The image that container should run, the ports, networks, volumes, environment variables, etc. And then restart policy. Similarly, at the same level, I'll go for service 02 and then I'll put the same information. Okay. In case if volumes and networks are to be created, okay, I need to create at the services level. Let's say I'll say volumes. Okay. And then I'll give the name of the volume. Then automatically it will run Docker volume create. Networks, I'll just give the name of the network. It will automatically create the bridge network. And since I will have the network, I can use them here. Okay. If I say I ask it to create X network, then I'll say put this service one in X network, service two in the same X network. Got it? So don't get confused. Services are nothing but containers here. Container one, container two. Okay. This like this. Okay. So here version 3. So this is uh, don't get confused with the Docker Compose version. So this is the syntax version of the Compose file. Okay, so in Docker V2, that is Docker Compose version 2, you don't have to put this version tag also. Okay, it's completely remote because this is only for Docker Compose V1 version. Sorry, Docker Compose V1, Docker Compose V1 syntax. Okay, services, under that you will have service 01, its name, image, if you want to replace the CMD or entry point, that you can do, your environment variables, ports, volumes, networks. Similarly, create the same configuration for service 02, and then you can also include volumes and networks in case if you want to create volumes before using. Okay. Now let me show you a simple example how to deploy this. So I have a front end, I have a back end. So these are two different containers. So I want them to be on a separate network. Okay. And probably some volume mounting. Okay. So how do I do this using my regular Docker run commands? Okay. So first I need to create a network of driver bridge. The name of the network is mynet. Okay. Again, if I need some backup volumes, I need to create using Docker volume create the name of the volume. Okay. So first what I'll do is I'll try to create my okay, I think yeah, so the name of the container here should be MariaDB. I Okay. So here what I'm doing, I'm running them individually. So I'll say Docker run, name of the container is MariaDB. The port mapping is 3306 because this should be internal to your Docker host. You don't have to expose it outside because WordPress internally uses database, MariaDB database, but WordPress should be exposed outside. That's why you have port mapping in the form of host colon the container port. Okay. Now MariaDB runs on 3306. You're using volume mount MySQL hyphen data, so which I created it here, and I'm mounting into value MySQL, and also I'm putting this container into mynet, which I just created, and supplying some environment variables, and finally the name of the MariaDB container image. Similarly, I'll do it for my WordPress. Right, guys? Any questions in this?
So one more question. So regarding the slide which you showed before, so if my voice clear, Vikram?
Sorry.
Uh, the previous slide you showed, right? So first containers, volumes, network.
Yeah,
So first we need to create volumes and networks, right? Before creating the container, so that order will be maintained.
correct.
Right.
First, your database should be created, then your WordPress should be created. Okay. But how do you do this using Docker Compose? It is relatively easy with Docker Compose. Okay. So I'll say version 3.10 services. If you see, there are two services by the name WordPress and the other name is MySQL. Okay. So here in WordPress, what I'm saying is use this image. Okay. So let's come back to this depends on later. Okay. So WordPress run, this image is WordPress. So ports is 8080 colon 80. See here, this ports is nothing but a list. Okay. Because you can expose multiple ports. So I can use -p multiple times. So it should be provided in the form of a list. So in the next line, if you want to, use any other port mapping, right? I can use extra hyphen here. I can do it like this. Since this is a list in YAML, you can also put list like this. So ports colon. I can put list items like this. Got it. If you want to add one more list element, you have to put comma and internally you should have one more port mapping. Okay. And then I have some environment variables set here. Okay. Some volumes. So if you say this volume is not Docker volume, so this is just a bind volume. I'm just taking the WordPress data volume, which is currently available in my local machine. Okay. And I'm mounting it. And here volumes is also an array element because you can have multiple hyphen V's. Networks also, you can have multiple networks, right? You can attach a container to multiple networks. That's why it is a list element. Okay. And why this mynet is used here? Because I want to put this WordPress in mynet. So for that, I just have to put networks and then say what is the name of the network. Okay. And then the drivers and all by default are taken as the bridge driver. Otherwise, you can also put the configurations related to it by referring to the documentation. Okay. So this network I just created and I used it here. And coming to the MySQL, I'm using this image, giving this environment variables and volumes here. This is a Docker volume, MySQL data. That's the reason why I mention it here. So my Docker Compose can create it. Okay. And then I'm mounting into some location inside the container. And also I'm just placing this MySQL in the same network so that the WordPress can talk to MySQL using the name of the MySQL. Okay. So here this MySQL becomes the name of the container. Okay. I mean DNS resolution is possible now with this name called MySQL. Okay. And now these are the two different containers, correct? But I want the MySQL to be up before WordPress comes up. So how do you create the dependency order? Okay. So using depends on. Okay. Let's say depends on. So whatever service you have, like MySQL is the name, you just put it as the list element. The reason why this is a list element is, let's say you have defined, uh, you know, let's say three different containers. And I want this first container to be up after 2 and 3. In that case, I have to use -1, -2. So which means this WordPress will only run, sorry, -2 and -3. So we'll only run once 2 and 3 containers are up. Okay, so this is a dependency order. This is how you wait for the other containers to start before you start your particular container. Okay, so with this single compose file, you can create this entire stack. No need to create networks manually, volumes manually, and use Docker and commands to individually create those containers. Clear, guys?
Yes, Vikram.
Okay. Now, once you have this, yeah,
Vikram, if we create the application without mentioning network, it will be creating a new bridge
correct.
network, right?
Yeah, correct. It will create with, uh, basically, if you don't provide the name, it will use the name of the folder in which this compose file is available to name various things. Okay.
Okay.
I'll show you like how that can be a disadvantage. Okay. Otherwise, you can just give the name. It will use the name.
Okay.
Okay, and if you have the compose file, the standard name of this file is, earlier it used to be docker-compose.yml. Okay, so this is the default file name the Docker expects. Of course, you can also use a different file name. So you can bring up this complete stack using Docker Compose, Docker-compose, up hyphen D, which means you bring it up in the daemon mode, background mode. Okay, here I'm not giving any input, Docker Compose file input, because if you have a file with the standard name, automatically your Docker Compose will take. Otherwise, you should use hyphen F followed by the name of the Docker Compose file. Okay, so now in version 2, this command is changed. So it should be Docker space compose, and rest of the command remains the same. And now Docker compose file, it can be docker hyphen compose.yaml, or it can be simple compose.yaml as well. Okay, so these two names are taken as the standard names, which means if you have a compose with these names, you don't have to mention it separately using hyphen F. Clear, guys? Okay. So if you have multiple compose files broken, let's say, I want to break individual services into probably individual compose files and all, you can give all those compose files using hyphen F, hyphen F. So at the end, all these will be merged into a single compose file, and your entire application stack will be deployed. Okay, so that option is also there. And not only that, see, whatever we seen here, so these are actually using the images directly. Okay, so which means these images, either they should be locally available or they should be pulled from any container registry. Okay, but what if I don't have that image yet? I just have Docker file. Okay, and I want to build it first. Okay, so for building, obviously I have to go for Docker build command to build the compose file, I mean the Docker file into an image. Then only I should use that image, whatever I created. Okay, so what if I don't want to build it separately? I want that build process to be part of the compose file itself. Again, it is possible. Okay, so here what I'm doing, I'm just taking a service called WordPress. Okay, so I don't have the image yet, like image work WordPress like this. Instead, I have the compose file. So what I have to do is I have to include a build section here. Okay, so the context. Okay, so in the build, I have to give where exactly my Docker file is there. I'll say the Docker file is there in the current directory. So put it dot Docker file. What is the name of the Docker file? So if it is with a standard name Docker file, you don't have to give this line. Otherwise, you need to give which, what is the name that you've used for Docker file, and what is the name of the image that you wanted to tag. Okay, then what will happen if you do this is, so your WordPress service, okay, if this image is not available yet, so it uses the build section to build your Docker file first, and then it will start the service. Okay, so by default, if you do Docker compose up minus D, okay, if your compose doesn't find this image, okay, so it will first build it, and then only it will start the container. Or let's say I don't want to bring up the containers. I just want to, build this Docker file. So let's say I have 10 services. For all the 10 services, I have 10 Docker files. So none of the image is available. I need to build it. Okay, but I don't want to start it yet. So simply say Docker Compose build. So what it will do is it will scan the entire Docker Compose file, find all the services that has this build section, and simply build that Docker file. Clear?
Yes,
Here,
Vikram.
here the context will take if I have like source files or any other external files. So the whole context will be the whole directory will be taken as in the context, right?
Yeah, so that's what we discussed, right? Context means it is current folder.
Okay. Ideally, you said like we should not pass the whole context. We should only pass the required file, right? So, I mean, to speed up the building process.
So that you'll use Docker ignore, right? Anyways, to ignore files. So
Oh,
that those things are there in the Docker file.
okay.
I mean, you can control what all files you want to copy into the image. That syntax is there in Docker file, right? So here we are just giving the location of the Docker file to the Docker combo so that it can build it.
Okay.
Okay.
Vikram, so this image, right? So if it is in private repository, so then now we can provide the credential details and all.
The credential details and all, you should do it in Docker login. So you should have logged in first.
Okay. So before using this, we should use login command, right?
So that
Yeah.
your compose can pull from that registry.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so let's see some examples because I don't want to spend more time on compose because this is not being used. I just wanted to show a syntax, and also I want to show you how to set up Prometheus and Grafana to monitoring Docker daemon. Okay, so for this, I'll just show you. I mean, you can just refer the official documentation of Docker Compose. Um, like what has changed, how do you migrate to Compose V2 from V1? Okay. So you can try Compose. Okay, so they have given some Python example. So you can follow the step-by-step method. Okay, so I'm not going to follow that. So instead, I'll show you my own application. Okay, so how I containerize it, what are the issues I'm facing. Okay, so we will see this. So I have a Python to-do app. Okay, um, but before that, let me show you one more uh, repository. Okay, just search for something known as awesome compose. Okay, so these are all the compose file examples directly from Docker. Okay, so you can pick any of these compose file and try to deploy it. Okay, so in fact, your Prometheus and Grafana, like deploying it with the compose file is also there in this repository. Okay, so let me just take this Spring Postgres. As the name itself indicates, so you have a backend and you have a database. And then if you see, you have compose.yaml. As I already said, in the earlier version, these files are known as docker-compose.yaml, but now it is compose.yaml. Okay. Okay, now you can see uh, you know, that version tag is missing. Okay, so whatever version that we are putting, so that version is missing. And these are the two services like backend and the database. Okay, see here, build backend. It says build and then backend. So what is the meaning of build backend? So it has something to do with the building the image, right? Okay, so what they just did is they just gave the name of the folder. Okay, so if I go back to the repository, you have the backend. So they just gave this name of the folder. So now what Docker Compose will do is, so it will just take this folder, read the Docker file, and then it will build it. Okay. You can ignore the context, you can ignore the name and all that, whatever we mentioned, right? Because already they are using the standard names like Docker file. Okay, so which means this compose file is not directly using the image, just like this service. See, this service is using Postgres image. So this is directly coming from which one, guys? This is directly coming from Docker Hub. Okay, but this image, I'm building it first and then only I'm starting it. So they have port mapping, some environment variables, networking. So for networking, they just created a network and then they have put both this backend service and you can see here this DB service. Got it? And let's say this database container fails often. So I can also set restart policy to set restart to always. Okay, so they also have some volumes and they introduced a new concept known as secrets. Okay, so in order to inject the secret data, okay, if you want to know about secrets, they have given it here. So they are just like normal configurations only. Okay, anyways, we are not using those secrets. But let me show them. Let me search for them. Okay, so this is here. Yeah, using secrets. Okay, so secrets you can use to store the passwords or the API keys, tokens and all. Okay, so you can use secrets in your compose file. Okay, so basically when we have some compose, some credentials to be passed, right? So we usually pass them using environment variables, right? Let's say Postgres DB or the user. Sometimes we also tend to pass passwords through environment variables because there is no other way. But now you can use secrets, to send the data. Okay. So here what they are trying to do is they are trying to use a secret called my secret. The name of the secret is my secret, and that secret file is coming from this. Okay. And what I'm doing is whenever I create a secret with this name, I can mount that secret into this container. Okay, so how do I mount is, so just give the secrets and name of the secret that you created. And where exactly this is available is, this is available under var secrets, run secrets, and the name of the secret that you have used inside the container. So from this location inside the container, okay, whatever contents that you have, right? So that content will be put inside that particular path. Okay. Okay, now look at this example. So what I did is, so I have some secrets. Okay, like database password is one secret, database root password is one secret. That secret is available in these two files in my local machine. Okay, so I created the secret object using Compose. And now what I have to do is I have to use these secrets in my, let's say this DB. So what I have to do is I have to just mention secrets and whatever secret names that I've used to create them, these two. But where exactly this content will be mounted, mounted into the containers is, it is run secrets. Okay, that's the reason why what I'm doing is I'm running the root password from run secrets and this secret name. So whatever content you have, you will have it here. Got it? So this avoids, exposing the secrets. Okay. So if I have to give the DB password, usually what I'll do, I'll simply say env my root password file equal to, I might tend to put the password directly here, right, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. See, now to avoid this, you have the secrets as well. Okay. Okay. So if you want to know more about these secrets, you come back here and just practice it. Otherwise, you can just take any compose file from this awesome compose examples. Okay, all are same. Let's say if you're interested in deploying it Django application. Okay, again, if you see, it is pretty much a single container. And again, there is no image yet. So what they are saying is use context as app and target as the builder. Okay. So what is the meaning of this is, if I just go back to the Django, okay, they are saying use target as this, which means use this as the context. And then inside it, you have the Docker file, but also they're asking you to build only to this builder stage, which means they're using multi-stage builds. And somewhere they mention the name of the stage. See here, name of the stage is builder, which means they're asking you to build only to this stage, only the first part. Okay, if you don't mention this target, what will happen is this entire Docker file will be built. Okay, so depending upon the requirement, so if you see a couple of examples, you will understand the overall syntax. Okay, so that is about compose. Now what compose file I have is, so basically I have a Python to do application. So there is this app.py file for my application, and then there is this Docker file that will build my application. Okay, and also, yeah, that's it. Now, how I wrote the compose file, you know, just wait for a second, guys. I think I need to make some changes, quick changes. These are all not required. Okay, so I have these, examples. Okay, yeah. Now coming to the compose file. Okay, so I have MySQL as the backend. That's the reason what I did is I used MySQL. And here I named this container as MySQL. Okay, so the reason why it is required is, so whenever these services are created using Compose, right? So these never become the name of the container. Okay, so these names will have the folder name as well added to it. Okay, I don't want to use that. That's why I'm also naming my containers. Okay, so I'll show you what will happen if I don't use the container name. I'm using MySQL 5.7 as the image, port mapping 3306. My MySQL requires the root password and initial database to use, that is to do. Okay, so I'm providing this information. Okay, and also I need some initdb script. Okay, so what is this initdb script is, let's say once you have the MySQL, so let's say I want to create a database called to do, and inside that I wanted to create a schema or I want to create a table. Okay, that's the initial table. Okay, so MySQL provides you a location called docker entry point initdb.d. So that's a directory. And if you put any SQL files inside the directory, it is going to run those secret files when the container is created. Got it? Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it
What?
will try to create. So that's why what I did is I did init SQL. So what it is doing is it is creating a database called to do if it is not there, and then it will use that database to create a table. Okay, so what is the table doing here is it is creating to do items, like what is the id of that particular to do list, like the data will be like one, name of the to do, and whether it is completed or not completed. Okay, so this id becomes the integer. Okay, it cannot be null. I mean, it cannot be empty, and it should auto increment, which means whenever user creates a new to do, it should automatically increase its ID like 1, 2, 3 like that. And then I'm giving the title, which means what is the to do item, and then whether it is completed or not, it should store true or false of type Boolean. Okay, so this is the initial script I have to run. That's why what I did is, in my compose file, I just took that init SQL file from my current directory, and then I mounted it into this directory so that my MySQL can read any sort of SQL file, and it will execute the commands inside that SQL file. Okay, clear? So this is MySQL, and coming to this front end, what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to build it. So if I say build dot, okay, which means the current path has the Docker file. So let's say the current path doesn't have the file. So you have inside a folder known as, let's say, app. Okay, then you have to use it like this. And then let's say my Docker file is with a different name. Okay, then you use Docker file. What is the name of the Docker file that you have? Okay, clear?
What will be
If I
the image created for the image name? I mean, image name created by that context.
Yeah, so I'll show you. That's why I'm leaving it empty.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to show you like how Docker Compose treats some defaults. Okay, and again, the application listens on port 5000. I also use depends on MySQL. Okay, so this is an array syntax. Otherwise, what you can do is you can simply put in the array format like this. Okay, and some environment variables here. So this WordPress, my application requires an URL to connect to the database. Okay, so here I'm trying to connect to, so this you can just ignore. So this is a database URI. You can also say it is a connection string. Okay, so just leave till here. So here I'm connecting as a root user with admin123 as the password. So by default, this MySQL has the root user, and this root password I'm setting it as admin123 at the rate of your IP address of your container where database is running. Since I cannot use the IP, I'm just using the name of the container called MySQL because it is available with the MySQL. Okay. But here, this MySQL is not the name of the container, the name of the service. Your containers will be named separately. Okay. But if you want to force create a name to a container, you should use container underscore name. And for DNS resolution, I'm using this 3306 is the port number where in which MySQL runs, and slash /sudo means to which database your front end should connect to inside that particular database. Okay, so this is the entire what do you say my compose file. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll try to do it in my Linux machine. Okay, because I wanted to also show you how to install Docker Compose. So currently this particular VM doesn't have Docker Compose. Okay, so Compose is not a Docker command. So what we can do is we can just come here, click on install Docker Compose, and I can install it manually. So download and install manually. Okay, all I have to do is I have to just copy these commands. Okay, so it will install Compose. So now if I just type Docker space Compose, okay, I think it is installed. Where exactly it is installed? Okay, I think we need to add the permissions. So these steps are also needed. I'm changing the permissions of the Docker Compose. Okay. Yeah, it installed anyways. Okay, so now I have Docker Compose installed. So what I'll do is I'll just take that repository. Okay, so this is the repository called Docker files, and inside it you have 17 number Python to do app. Okay, I'm just cloning it. Okay, 17 to do app. Okay, and if I just see the compose file, so here as someone said, I'm not giving the name of the image, right? Okay, so it will automatically create a name. And let me just show you what all commands you have for Docker Compose. Okay, so Docker Compose has this command called up to create the containers, down to bring down the containers, and also you have something known as build to just build the services. Okay. Otherwise, if you simply do Docker Compose up -d, because compose file is there in the current location only, you can see here, uh, first it is running MySQL container because your WordPress container depends on MySQL. So MySQL has to run. So it is trying to pull the container image from Docker up. And then if you see, it is starting to build the other service. Okay. Okay. Now you can see once it built, right? Okay. So by default, it has created the network. Okay. And then it has put the two containers here, MySQL and web. Okay. So someone asked, what is the name, right? Okay. If you look at this naming convention, okay. So it will use the name of the folder hyphen the service name called web. The service name is web, right? Correct. And this is the folder name. So this is the name that it will use.
Okay. Even the name of the container comes the same way if we are not given, right?
Sorry, coming in.
Even the name of the container comes in the same way. I mean,
No, so container names, and one more thing here. See, in this compose file, you have multiple containers, right? So if I simply do Docker PS, it will also show all the containers from from other services as well. Okay. But if you do Docker compose PS, it is just like you're targeting PS command against this compose file. So currently what happened is, if I see ps-a output, so you can see that this Python app is failed. The reason I know why it is failed I can show you Docker logs. Okay. The reason why it failed is, so when MySQL came up, right? So this is the name of this. Okay. So here it is not able to connect to this MySQL. Okay. The reason why it was not able to connect to MySQL is, so this web container started. Okay. Even before this MySQL configured the initial database. Okay. Got it? So when web tried to connect to this database, since it is not available yet, so this Python container failed. Even though you have the dependency order, but MySQL container needs some time, so it failed. Okay, if I try to bring up this stack again, okay, you can see that it will try to restart all the containers that are stopped. Now, if I try to look at the ps-a output, this time it is successful because MySQL got created and configured. Got it. But every time I cannot do up minus D, right? To see what all fail containers and to restart them. Correct. Right, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I should do in this case is, okay, so let me bring down the stack first. Okay. Let me show the problem again. So I'm bringing down all the things like containers and the networking. In case if you're creating any volumes, those will not be impacted. Okay. So let me bring it up again. Okay. So first it will create the network. And then it will put both the containers in it. Now, if I do ps-a, again, this is a fault. This is an issue for me. Got it? But if I do up again, so Docker Compose will see what all services are running and what are not running. It will try to restart the exited containers again. But the problem is again, this will now run, but the first time it is not running. Correct. So how do I fix this is, I'll bring down everything. So let me vi into compose file. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll simply set a restart policy to it. Okay, somewhere I'll set the restart to always. Okay, so let's see whether this will fix or not. Let me bring it up. Okay, for the first time, anyways, it will fail. Okay, but it will try to restart. Okay, so once it is restarted, anyways, it will be able to connect, right? Correct?
Yes, we can.
But
Can we
what is the Mhm. Sorry.
can we timeout I mean some sleep count or something?
Yeah, that's what I'm coming up. So what is the ideal way is you should use health checks. Okay. So I should use health check in the MySQL container to see whether MySQL is actually up or not. Okay. So that is one way. So the other way is I can go for health checks in Kubernetes, that is through probes. Okay. Or else what I should do is I should include a logic inside my web application in such a way that it only starts when the dependent database is up. Okay, clear. So that way I can, eliminate all these errors. Okay. Now, as I said, Docker Compose supports a lot of things. Let's say if I have to do top to see the the PIDs and all, I can do Docker Compose top. So this will only run top for all the containers that are mentioned in that compose file. So currently, how many are there? So you have MySQL container and web container. Okay, got it. And then I can bring it down. And since my compose file also have some build instructions that are building the images, so what I can do is I can simply use build like this here. So what this will do is this will just run build. Any service that has build instructions, it will build. And then I can also use push, uh, you know, pushing 2 by 0 web skipped. Um, Let me check why it is skipping. Docker Compose push is there. Yeah, push service images. Um, I think it is failing because I did not properly tag it. Sorry, Docker images. It is not tagging it with my username, right? It is using which one here? Yeah, so this is the name. So it will fail because it is not using my it is not tagged with my username, and also Docker login and all I did not do. Okay. So you can see, you can stop, you can see the stats also, because your compose file has all the services. If I run stats, it will just show you the stats for both the containers. So currently, this is the stats. Um, it's not displaying properly. It should actually display the individual container stats. Otherwise, I can also get the help section. Okay, so Docker container stats, I'll simply say -all for all the containers. And here I'll say -format. Let me just give it as the table format like this. It's not giving, it's fine, I'm not sure. Otherwise, you can do individual container stats like Docker stats, the name of the container. Uh, oh, so did we bring down
Yeah,
the stack?
exactly.
Okay, that's why it's not. Okay, I started again. Now I can see all the stats. Okay, clear, guys? Any questions? So this
Uh,
is about.
can you comment the container name and see like the default name it gives?
Yeah, the same thing.
Okay,
It will
also
append the
take the
folder name.
folder. Okay, same as image.
Anyways, no, I'll show it anyways. Okay, so the problem is, I'm using here the container name, right? Okay, so now the container names, if you don't provide it, okay, I'm not providing that container name for the web service, container name for the MySQL service. Let me try to bring it up. Okay, you can see the names of the containers. Okay. See, names, they are different. Okay. Now DNS resolution fails. The reason why it failed. So here I'm trying to connect to the database with the host called MySQL, but there is no host called MySQL, right? This is the host name. Got it?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the reason why I had to go for the naming the containers. So not only that, you'll have a lot of configurations. You can just go through the documentation. So you'll find a lot of other configurations for each individual services, build and all, but it's not required for now. Okay, anyways, we are not using it.